Welcome to another tale from the Nuestra Familia crime files. In previous Convicts and Cops episodes, we have touched upon the NF's attempted murder of former NF soldier Chango Zavala from San Jose and the successful execution of one-time NF General Robert Brown Bob Viramontes. Whenever we discuss organized crime units, there invariably exists a nexus with other relative players. We will be dropping names such as Chuco Guillen, David D.C. Cervantes, and James Conejo Perez, among others, who ushered in a new era in the history of the Nuestra Familia. They became the movers and shakers of the NF state operations in California. We will highlight three distinct time periods in the NF's history and share with you how these men factor into this interesting story. Before we begin, allow me to share with you a word from our sponsor from Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. What a difference between divine wisdom and the way we elect to proceed in life, doing things our way. Before we get to the present, let's address and discuss the Nuestra Familia history, which can be divided into four distinct time periods. The first era we will call the formative years. This era began when the Nuestra Familia was founded in 1965 at the Correctional Training Facility in Soledad, California, by John Little John Valdez from Little Valley, a barrio in East Los Angeles, Freddy Gonzalez from San Diego, Gonzalo Chalo Hernandez from Bakersfield, and Bruce Güero Morgan from Clanton, a barrio on the west side of Los Angeles. During this period, the Nuestra Familia announced its presence in the CDC when they launched an attack on the Mexican Mafia at San Quentin during the infamous 1968 Shoe War. Then, they were very much on the short end in the 1972 war against the Mexican Mafia and the Aryan Brotherhood. That formative era concluded with the implementation of a new constitution in July 1973. The second era is the military dictatorship. Leaders in the Nuestra Familia acknowledged a quality control shortcoming and were not satisfied with the members' embarrassing performance during the 1972 war, and a new constitution was authored by Death Row Joe and Robert Daira Medina. Robert Babo Sosa was appointed to the position of Nuestro General, and Death Row Joe Gonzalez assumed the role of first captain. These two men, entrenched in their lofty positions of authority, maintained the grip of life and death over every member of the Nuestra Familia. Internal cleansing became the order of the day. Babo and Death Row Joe's bloody fingerprints were evident, and their wrath was meted out to those they deemed to be a coward, traitor, or deserter. And there were many. The street subdivisions to the Nuestra Familia Constitution were written by Death Row Joe in 1975, and the NF expanded their criminal activities to the streets. The third era we will call the Mesa system. It began with the impeachment of Babo Sosa, led by Robert Black Bob Vasquez from Gilroy. It led to the revision of the NF Constitution to address the concentration of power under a supreme leader and spread the power and responsibility of running the Nuestra Familia amongst three generals and an inner consul. During these years, the CAT system was also established. Category 3 members were the veteran, seasoned members of the organization that advised the generals and had voting privileges in important matters, such as appointments to the High Command, also referred to as the Mesa. Cat 2 members were the maestros or teachers who schooled and indoctrinated newly inducted members in the ways of the familia. Cat 1 members were the new recruits. Lastly, the Nuestra Familia established the Nuestra Raza subgroup to carry out NF's business on the main lines, since most members were housed in various lockdown units throughout the CDC. As part of the establishment of the Nuestra Raza, Hector Copas Gallegos wrote the 14 bonds outlining the NR Code of Conduct. With that quick overview in mind, we arrive and address the NF 21st century era, which continues its journey and is unfolding at the present time even as we speak. This is the fourth era. On April 19th, 2001, a federal grand jury in San Francisco handed down a 25-count indictment charging 13 Nuestra Familia members and associates with murder, conspiracy, racketeering, and drug dealing. The indictments were a result of an undercover investigation called Operation Black Widow that began in 1997. When I think of Operation Black Widow, there were many characters involved, both on the law enforcement side and on the suspect side. But the two people that come to my mind are George Collard, an investigator in Northern California, Santa Rosa PD, I believe it was, and Daniel Lizard Hernandez, a former NF member who worked undercover and was very instrumental in helping and assisting in breaking that case, working on the streets as an undercover operative. The high command of the NF was housed in Pelican Bay's security housing unit. These men were locked down in a windowless cell for 22 and a half hours per day, but authorities insist this did not prevent them from orchestrating and issuing murders and conducting other criminal activities on the streets of Northern California. Of course, anyone who knows how it works in the California prison system will tell you for certain that prison gangs have several surefire avenues of communication to the outside. The OGB, overall governing body, of the Nuestra Familia was also referred to as La Mesa. It consisted of James Tibbs Morado, serving in the role of General Advocate's Officer, Cornelio Corny Tristan, serving as General of the Prisons, Joseph Pinky Hernandez was the General of the Street Regiments, Tex Terrible T Hernandez, serving in the Security Department, and Gerald Cuete Rubalcaba, then Regimental Security Director. These men eventually pled out or were convicted and sent off to the feds, aka the BOP, Bureau of Prisons. Their banishment to the feds created a power vacuum, and eventually a general council was established consisting of 3 generals and 4 members in an inner council that served as advisors to the generals and provided a system of checks and balances. Antonio Chuco Guillen assumed the role of general of the street regiments, which controlled NF criminal activity on the streets. James Conejo Perez assumed the role of general of prisons, controlling NF criminal activity in the California prison system, and David D.C. Cervantes assumed the role of General Advocate's Office, which oversaw member discipline, deciding when members should be attacked or killed for violating the gang's code of conduct. The 4 inner council members included George Puppet Franco, Guillermo Capone Solorio, Trinidad Trino Martinez, and Samuel Sammy Luna. As mentioned earlier, in 1998, Chuco attempted to murder a loyal NF soldier and fellow San Jose homeboy named Chango Zavala on orders from Skip Villanueva, and then successfully planned and supervised the murder of one-time General Robert Brown Bob Firamontes in 1999. Chuco returned to the California Department of Corrections on June 7, 2000, riding high after the murder and mayhem he had wreaked on the streets. Chuco was a man on the rise, and he utilized his elevated status to secure a seat as a general on the General Council that replaced the previous leadership team sent to the Bureau of Prisons after the Black Widow indictments. Here is where I wish to introduce the criminal resume of D.C. Cervantes and Conejo Perez. Let's begin with D.C. On May 29, 1977, D.C. Cervantes, fellow NF Carnales Sammy Venegas, Eddie Crackers Vindiola from Fresno, also referred to as galletas, Spanish for crackers, David Morris, a.k.a. Chipmunk, Vincent Arroyo, a.k.a. Chente from Salinas, Gilbert Juarez, Joseph Hernandez, a.k.a. Pinky, and Hector Gallegos, also known as Copas from Salinas, planned to execute two Nuestra Familia hermits that night in Bakersfield, California. A hermit was the NF code for an ex-member or defector targeted for execution. One of the intended targets was Richard Reyes, a.k.a. Richie Boy, and the other was NF founding member Gonzalo Hernandez, a.k.a. Chalo from Bakersfield. Art the Rock Beltran, another highly placed member who would later defect, testified that David Morris, the Bakersfield Regiment lieutenant, reported to him that Chalo, who Babo placed on the Nuestra Familia hit list in 1973, was selling narcotics in Bakersfield, stealing business away from the Familia's drug business, who had surrounded himself with other NF defectors, also known as dropouts. Art the Rock reported this to Death Row Joe in Soledad, and Death Row sent out execution orders. Incidentally, the Joseph Hernandez, a.k.a. Pinky, referenced as a member of the hit team, is the same Pinky that was one of the Nuestra Familia generals convicted in the Black Widow case who was sent to the feds. This provided the opening for Chuco Guillen, D.C. Cervantes, and Conejo Perez to take control of Nuestra Familia's state operations. On May 29, 1977, the hit team departed in two vehicles heading for Chalo Hernandez's mother's home and the residence of dropout Richie Boy Reyes. The two Bakersfield homeboys lived across the street from each other on Henley Street. The would-be assassins shot up both homes, injuring some of the inhabitants in Chalo's mom's home and killing a visitor at Richie Boy Reyes' home. Next on their target list was the home of Chalo's brother. Chalo's brother and NF defector David Bautista were not going to be sitting ducks. They had armed themselves with a 30-06 rifle and 20-gauge shotgun after receiving the warning of the earlier shootings. A fierce shootout ensued, resulting in David D.C. Cervantes being shot once in the leg. Gilbert Juarez was shot twice, also in the legs, and both men were hospitalized at the Kern County Hospital. David Morris, a.k.a. Chipmunk, was shot to death in this attack. Vincent Chente Arroyo suffered a wound to the arm between the elbow and shoulder as a direct result of a shotgun blast. I'm sure Chente could thank his lucky stars later that it was only a 20 gauge and not a 12 gauge shotgun. Big difference in those two weapons. Chente was taken to Fresno and treated under a false identity. Arrested were Copas Gallegos, Pinky Hernandez, Sammy Venegas, and Crackers Vindiola. Talk about turning the tables and the prey becoming the predator. Like a scene out of The Gang That Couldn't Shoot Straight, things could have resulted in far worse casualties for the attackers had the firepower been just a little more powerful. Nevertheless, this proves what I always say regarding men who are no longer in the prison gang game. Our trigger fingers aren't broken. D.C., Copas Gallegos, Pinky Hernandez, and Gilbert Juarez were arraigned on June 3, 1977. Sammy Venegas and Crackers Vindiola were being held in Kern County Jail on parole holds. On July 8, 1977, charges were dropped against Copas, Gilbert Juarez, and Pinky due to lack of evidence. On August 8, 1977, the charges against D.C. were also dropped because several of the witnesses refused to testify, and one potential witness had been murdered. However, this was only a short reprieve. NF dropout Raymond Duran Perez was present on the night of the Memorial Weekend shootout. He proceeded to share the details of that night with members of law enforcement. Warrants were issued for the hit team's arrest. DC was arrested on May 3, 1978 in Ontario and booked into the Kern County Jail. On December 31st, 1978, DC, Pinky Hernandez, Chente Arroyo, and Gilbert Juarez escaped from the Kern County Jail in Bakersfield. The four men were last seen in their cells during the 10 p.m. count and were discovered missing at the 3 a.m. count. They utilized hacksaw blades to cut through the bars of their cells, broke out decorative glass bricks on the other side, and lowered themselves to the ground on makeshift ropes made of bed sheets. On February 27, 1979, members of the Burglary Apprehension Team, Chino Police, Los Angeles County Sheriff's Prison Gang Unit, Kern County Sheriff's Deputies, Ontario and Montclair Police worked together to capture DC at approximately 10 p.m. in an apartment in the 12,000 block of Yorba Avenue in Chino, California. He offered no resistance and was taken into custody without incident. On June 6, 1979, after a Kern County Superior Court jury deliberated for 3 hours, DC was convicted of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and 6 counts of assault with a deadly weapon for the 1977 Memorial Weekend shootout that left several people injured and 2 people dead. He was sentenced to serve a prison term of 15 years to life in state prison. The next subtopic up for discussion is the criminal resume of James Conejo Perez. On February the 4th, 1973, at 5 a.m., 18-year-old Conejo and 17-year-old Arthur Velasquez knocked on the door of Norman William Gambling, a 62-year-old heart patient. When Gambling answered the door, Conejo thrust a knife at his throat, and he and Velasquez forced their way into the home. Conejo's brother, 20-year-old Peter Velasquez, a U.S. Marine on leave, entered the home brandishing a meat cleaver. Conejo held Mr. Gambling at knife point as the others ransacked the home. They took 2 television sets, 4 radios, several bottles of liquor, a tape recorder, $78 in cash, stole his car, and broke most of the furniture in the home. The total cumulative loss resulting from the household items was valued at $1,789. Conejo and Velasquez were arrested on February 9, 1973, and his brother was arrested in San Diego and returned to Sacramento to face charges. Although Mr. Gambling reported only 3 assailants, there were 4. Robert Gomez assisted law enforcement in return for the charges being dropped against him. Conejo was sentenced to state prison. His brother was sent to the California Medical Facility in Vacaville for a psychiatric examination, and Velasquez was sent to the Sacramento Boys Ranch. Once behind the walls, Conejo joined the Nuestra Familia, and in time became involved in several murders. On September 24, 1978, guards at the California Institution for Men in Chino found NF member Robert Garza from Sanger hanging from an air vent in his cell by a rope made from bed sheets. He was cut down and taken to the institution clinic where he was pronounced dead. An inmate living on the same tier told authorities that Conejo and Charles Beard were responsible for the murder. However, the case was rejected by the district attorney due to lack of evidence. Murder charges were refiled against Conejo and Beard after a second witness came forward. They were arraigned in Chino Municipal Court on January 2, 1979. NF dropout Jesse Gonzalez told authorities that Conejo was a Nuestra Familia lieutenant, and he ordered Beard to commit the murder. He stated Beard entered Garza's cell under the guise of performing some tattoo work on Garza's back, but instead he attacked and strangled him and then hung him from the vent to make it appear as if Garza took his own life. Because the original witness that came forward was now refusing to testify, the charges were once again dismissed since there was not a second witness to corroborate Gonzalez's testimony. Gonzalez also told authorities that Conejo ordered the murder of Peter Leclerc at the California Institution for Men's Maximum Security Palm Hall unit. This murder took place during an exercise period on November 26, 1976. At approximately 9 a.m., Jesse Gonzalez held a towel up against the guard cage to obstruct their view while Michael Manos Sosa, the brother of NF General Babo Sosa, used a shank made from a pitcher handle, and Richard Castro wielded a sharpened toothbrush. Leclerc suffered stab wounds to the chest and extensive blunt force trauma to his head. He received emergency treatment at the institution and then was transferred to San Bernardino County Hospital. He died at 5:30 p.m. on the same day he was being prepped for surgery to treat a broken jaw. An autopsy revealed he suffocated due to internal bleeding. Gonzalez was rewarded for his testimony and allowed to plead guilty to a lesser charge of being an accessory to murder and received a transfer to an out-of-state prison. Conejo paroled on December 3, 1977, back to Sacramento. On December 30th, 1977, he spent the evening drinking and smoking marijuana with his brother-in-law, Michael Rowe, and fellow NF member Alfredo Mendoza Reyes, also known as Chapo Rey de Bakersfield. At some point in the evening, the three left the house and shot Rowe 3 times in the back of the head with a .22 caliber weapon and dumped his body in Discovery Park. Conejo and Reyes returned to the home, told the occupants that they dropped Rowe off at the store, and then changed their story and said they dropped him off at a friend's house. Rowe's body was found by a jogger on January 2, 1978. The day after the murder, prosecutors said that Conejo traveled to Fresno to report the successful execution to NF Lieutenant Sammy Venegas. Michael Rowe was murdered because he was on the Nuestra Familia hit list as a suspected Aryan Brotherhood member. Former NF Lieutenant Carlos Ceja testified at the trial that prior to Conejo's parole, Conejo approached him with a picture of Michael Rowe and asked Ceja to check the hit list to determine if Rowe was marked for murder. Ceja confirmed that Rowe was on the hit list, but told Conejo he would need to obtain the green light for the hit from a lieutenant on the streets. Police interviewed Conejo and Reyes, but they denied any wrongdoing. A witness later found 6 .22 caliber bullets in the bathroom toilet, fragments of a burned wallet, and a receipt bearing Rowe's name. Before Conejo and Reyes could be arrested, they left Sacramento and law enforcement issued warrants for their arrest. On January 23, 1978, Conejo, Ronnie Loza, Luis Reyes, and Manuel Reyes broke into a home in Delano, California, demanding money and ordered 3 men and 2 women to lie on the floor while they searched the house. The gunmen then ordered the women into a bedroom where they fondled them and attempted sex acts with the women. While the home invasion crew was distracted, the 3 men hostages made their escape and called police. Realizing some of the hostages had escaped, the criminals fired several shots in the house, forced the women into a car, and tried to flee. As they drove away from the home, a police car turned into the street, positioned the vehicle into a roadblock, and captured the kidnappers. Conejo provided Delano police with a false name, but his identity was deciphered, and he was sent back to Sacramento to stand trial for the murder of Michael Rowe. On September 19, 1978, Conejo and Alfredo Reyes were convicted of first-degree murder. He would never see the streets again. What you have just heard in these accounts should never be mistaken for living a productive or glamorous life. It is an absolute example of a miserable existence which includes the inflicting of pain upon others. La vida loca, the crazy life, is the literal translation. If you are not taken out yourself from a multitude of reasons connected to that life, you are destined to spend the remainder of your life locked down in a cement box, waiting for someone to betray you or waiting for death to take you to your next destination. Trust me, there is a next destination. If you are serving a life sentence and you succeed in not being taken out by your own people due to internal politicking, odds are very high you will rot away from a drug-related disease resulting from your abuse of drugs, or you will simply die of an overdose. Therefore, please take heed and do not fall for the propaganda. Do not drink the Kool-Aid. Those lofty ideals of carnalismo or brotherhood are just a fake narrative and a false sense of security to entice recruits into the game. Remember, misery loves company. Like a runaway truck with no brakes, headed downhill to its final destruction. Your choice is to either jump off or continue on board to your premature destruction. Once truth and reality rear their ugly heads, it just might be too late. Good night, and God bless you.